You awaken in a tiny, windowless room that smells of olive oil, sweat, and anxiety. The iron shackle around your ankle has rubbed the skin raw, and dried blood flakes off when you move your feet towards heavy sandals on marble. The stone walls are cold against your bare skin, and you can hear the sound of laughter coming from the main house in the distance. It's the kind of laughter that makes your stomach knot with fear. Your body aches from the previous night's bruises, which are purple and yellow across your ribs like some hideous flower. Reaching for the flimsy tunic that has crumpled in the corner, your hands tremble. Time passes differently when you're 15 years old, but you've stopped counting birthdays since they brought you here. The door of your house scrapes open, metal on stone, and intense sunlight floods in, causing you to squint and raise a shaky hand to protect your eyes. The overseer has scars on his face and a mountain of muscle that fills the entryway, a map of cruelty carved by years of breaking young spirits. Clean yourself, he growls, flinging a damp cloth at your feet. The master has guests arriving tonight, important guests, and you, his eyes, rake over your body with the cold calculation of a horse trader. You're going to help amuse. This is the reality for many young men in ancient Greece, not the sanitized version taught in schools where philosophy and democracy shine bright enough to blind us to the shadows behind the marble columns and intellectual discourse behind the symposiums and political debates. You know what that means, because you've known since the first night. They dragged you kicking and screaming from your village because they told you that your family's debts had been paid in the only currency they had left you. This system consumed the weak and discarded their humanity like broken pottery before delving into these lost tales of survival and suffering. Perhaps you were born beautiful in a world that saw beauty as a commodity to be harvested and sold. In the rural villages scattered throughout the Greek countryside, where families lived on the precipice of survival, or perhaps your family owed money to a wealthy landowner. Or perhaps raiders swept through your village during one of the endless wars that plagued the Greek world. A poor harvest, a father's injury, or a death in the family might all cause a household to become indebted. And when the creditors arrived, they demanded payment in cash rather than in the form of promises or future profits. A small farming community nestled in a valley between olive groves, with simple mud, brick, and thatch houses, dirt floors, and single rooms where entire families sleep together for warmth. The children run naked between the houses, their laughter mingling with the sound of goats bleating, and the barley fields turning brown and brittle, and the wells that have supported the village for generations. Then comes the drought, week after week of merciless sun beating down on withered crops. The olive trees, old and gnarled, producing only shriveled fruit, the barley fields turning brown, and brittle wells that have supported the village for to run dry, and families are forced to make decisions that no parent should ever have to make. First, they sell their livestock, the goats and sheep that are their only source of wealth. And once those are gone, they start to look at their children differently. Sensing carrying, the slave traders arrive like vultures and set up their shop in the middle of the village. Their ledgers are packed with names and prices, and they offer instant payment for long-term agreements. 20 years of service for enough silver to keep a family fed through winter. It sounds reasonable, even generous, when your children are literally starving, but you're 12 years old. You don't understand the mathematics of desperation. You only know that your father won't meet your eyes as he negotiates your price, that your mother turns away when the merchant examines your teeth like you're a horse, and that you feel the rough hands checking your muscles, evaluating your potential. You hear words like promising, good breeding, and suitable for household service, but you don't understand what they mean. Not yet. The merchant counts out silver coins into your father's palm. The metal catches the sunlight, each piece representing a year of your life. Your father's hands shake as he takes the money, but he takes it nonetheless. Your mother covers her face and weeps, but she doesn't stop the transaction. They tell you it's temporary, that you'll earn money and return home a man wealthy enough to buy your own land, maybe even take a wife. They promise you'll be treated well, that you'll learn valuable skills, and that this is an opportunity for advancement. The journey to the city is a nightmare of chained necks and blistered feet. You're part of a human caravan now, with dozens of boys and young men bound together by iron and despair. The older ones don't talk much because they're tolerant that hope is just another word for future disappointment. The lies fall from their lips like honey from a broken comb, sweet but poisonous. You march past landscapes that might be lovely in different situations as the smaller children scream for their mums until their voices fail, or until the overseers beat the sound from their throats. Undulating hills with olive gardens on them. You see nothing of the mountain passes where eagles soar overhead, or the coastal highways where the sea gleams like strewn diamonds. At night, they chain you to stakes driven into the ground, and you lie on your side in the dirt, listening to the other boys' muffled sobs while feeling the weight of the iron around your neck like a collar of fate. Your world has shrunk to the length of the chain between you and the boy in front of you, to the rhythm of feet on stone, to the growing certainty that you will never see home again. Merchants occasionally invite customers to examine their goods. Gentlemen with analytical eyes and gentle hands stroll among you, prodding and poking livestock to look for illness or damage. Assessing your potential for different services teaches you to identify the various kinds of customers. The household masters seek a different quality, compliance, intelligence, and a certain fragility that suggests you won't cause trouble. But there is a third category, and you learn to dread their visits. The agricultural slave owners seek boys with strength and endurance who can work in the fields from sunrise to sunset. The slave market in Athens is an assault on all senses. The sound hits you first. Hundreds of voices, haggling, crying, pleading, and commanding. The smell follows with unwashed bodies, fear, sweat, urine, and something else you can't identify. But then you see it, and you understand why the older slaves warned you to keep your eyes down. Naked bodies arranged in rows like merchandise. Most of all, these men dress nicely, speak with cultural accents, and their fingers glitter with rings. When they examine you, their touch lingers in ways that make your skin crawl. The buyers are everywhere, circling like sharks, pointing and discussing prices, as if the people on the platforms can't hear every word. You're cleaned and oiled before your sale, not out of kindness, but because clean merchandise fetches higher prices. Children who are barely old enough to walk stand next to their mothers, their eyes wide with confusion. Old men with broken spirits and bent backs measure their value in whatever strength remains in their aging muscles. Your skin shines in the sunlight thanks to the oil, showcasing the toned muscles you've gained over the trip. You are placed with the domestic slaves who are meant to serve indoors, because someone has determined that you are too attractive for feel. The auctioneer's voice echoes throughout the marketplace as he lists your qualities, including your age, place of birth, physical state, and attractive appearance. He also uses code words that make some buyers lean forward with interest. The bidding begins low but quickly increases as more men enter the competition, and you stand motionless on the platform, attempting to blend into yourself as odd hands examine your body and someone opens your mouth to check your teeth, another test of your grip, strength, when a third person runs his fingers through your hair and remarks on its color and texture. You cease to be a person and are instead being considered as a product to be bought. The successful bidder is a man named Lysander, but you won't know his name until later. All you can see right now is his contented smile as he counts out the silver, his eyes already controlling you before the deal is finished. He is and well-fed and has soft hands from someone who has never done manual labor. His expensive silk tunic is dyed a deep purple that declares wealth and status, and there's something in his face that makes you want to flee even though the chains prevent you from leaving. Lysander owns a large home in affluent Athens, and his home is larger than your entire village. It has marble columns, painted walls, and intricate mosaics of gods and heroes. Trays of food and wine are carried by servants as they dart through the hallways. They move quickly and nervously. Many of them are young men, and while they are all attractive in their own unique ways, they all have the same expression of resigned misery that you are starting to identify as the face of captivity. The overseer who claims you from Lysander is named Demetrius. He was once a slave himself, bought when he was young, and he now controls the household slaves with an iron fist, knowing better than anyone how to break spirits and ensure compliance. As he walks you through the house, you will be fed twice a day, with barley porridge in the morning and bread and olives in the evening. And you will be given clean clothes once a week. You will bathe when instructed, eat when instructed, and sleep when instructed. You will only speak when instructed to do so. You will never look a free person in the eyes, and you will never refuse an order, no matter what it is, the part that makes your blood freeze in your veins. You are here to serve the master and his guests in whatever capacity they require, whether that service entails pouring wine, serving food, cleaning rooms, or providing entertainment. Demetrius says, it will become clear in time, with a wicked smirk. Some slaves resist at first, but resistance only results in pain. Compliance, on the other hand, can lead to certain privileges. Better cuisine, a more comfortable sleeping environment, possibly even minor personal belongings. Your new quarters are in the basement of the house, which has a number of small cells where the male slaves sleep. Each cell has a chamber pot, a straw mattress, and a thin blanket. The walls are made of thick stone that muffles sound, and the other slaves greet you with a mixture of warning and sympathy. Marcus, a boy about your age, who has been here for 2 years, has eyes that contain depths of pain that seem impossible for someone so young. Alexios, who is older and scarred, tells you in whispered conversations about the special guests who come to the house and what they expect from the entertainment. Philemon, who is only 14 years old, has the haunted expression of someone much older. He was once the son of a small merchant family until his father's business failed and creditors seized everything, including the children. He has been in the house for 6 months and is the one who explains what actually happens during the symposiums. Greek culture commemorated the symposium. However, the reality was frequently very different, especially when the guests demanded more intimate entertainment and the wine flowed freely. The drinking party, where educated men gathered to discuss philosophy, politics, and art, was, at least in their memory, a sophisticated affair with intellectually stimulating conversations between the greatest minds of the ancient world. The philosophers who discussed the nature of virtue and justice by day had no qualms about using young slaves for their own pleasure by night. The same men who wrote beautiful poetry about love and honor treated their human property like living toys to be used and discarded at will. Philemon describes the preparation rituals in a voice devoid of emotion, as if he's talking about someone else's life. The slaves are bathed and oiled, their bodies made smooth and gleaming, and they are occasionally given jewelry, such as golden bracelets or necklaces, which identify them as ornamental rather than functional. As slaves pour wine and serve sumptuous delicacies, the symposium officially begins. Guests relax on couches spread throughout the room and debate the day's issues. The topic of discussion could include Socrates' philosophy, the nature of democracy, or the most recent military operations. These are well-educated, sophisticated guys who take pleasure in their intellectual prowess. But as the evening wears on and the wine starts to take effect, the philosophical conversations give way to snickering. Stories about entertainment turn into crude jokes. Intellectual arguments turn into arrogant rivalry. And the slaves who had been quietly working around the room's periphery suddenly become the focus of attention. It all begins with modest requests, pouring wine for this visitor, massaging that person's shoulders, and feeding grapes to the man on the corner couch may seem like simple tasks, but you learn to recognize the warning signs. The way some visitors watch your movements with predatory fascination. The way conversations become quiet when you approach. The lingering touches that have nothing to do with serving wine. And the fact that you're too young to comprehend what's happening the first time you're chosen for special treatment. A man who is old enough to be your grandfather invites you to sit with him on his couch and asks you to share his wine. He says you should talk about your country and tell him about your family. His questions initially seem friendly, but as he talks, his hand rests on your shoulder. He then slowly moves to your back and lowers it. You try to get away, but his grip tightens. Other guests are watching, and their conversations are now fading as they concentrate on the entertainment. What follows is ingrained in your mind with a precision that only trauma can offer, including how your objections are dismissed and how the other visitors laugh at your difficulties. When your childhood ends in the most terrible way conceivable, you feel helpless as hands hold you down and your clothes are torn away. After that, you lie in your cell and stare at the stone ceiling, trying to figure out how the world could be so cruel. You're not even a person anymore. You're a thing to be used and discarded, a source of amusement for men who write poetry about the beauty of the human soul. Even though your body hurts, the emotional wounds are deeper. Over the next few months, You discover that what happened that first night was mild by the house's standards. Some guests have particular preference and cruelties they enjoy inflicting, and others compete to see who can break a slave spirit the most thoroughly. The overseer encourages this behavior. The home operates on a sophisticated hierarchy of cruelty, with the newest slaves receiving the worst punishment and being used as fresh meat for the guests' appetites. This is because shattered slaves are compliant slaves. If they live long enough, they may be promoted to other positions. Personal slaves to less aggressive lords or kitchen staff who hardly ever deal directly with visitors. But advancement demands more than just survival. It demands a total surrender of dignity and a readiness to take part in your own dehumanization. Alexios once defied a particularly humiliating order and spent 3 days chained in the courtyard without food or water, exposed to Thelmans as an example to the others. But resistance comes in many forms. Marcus, for example, tried to escape during his first month, but was captured and beaten so badly that he walked with a limp for weeks afterward. Death becomes a form of liberation. You've seen slaves simply stop eating, stop obeying orders, and stop caring whether they live or die. The overseers usually replace them quickly, so there's always a fresh supply of young bodies available at the slave markets. Some slaves withdraw so deeply into themselves that they become like walking corpses, present in body but absent in spirit. Others learn to anticipate their master's moods and avoid the worst punishments through careful observation and submission. The psychological methods employed to free slaves are both brutal and highly developed. One of the most powerful weapons is isolation. You are cut off from everyone you have ever known and surrounded by individuals who share your helplessness. While other slaves may sympathize, they are unable to provide you safety or hope. Another tactic is unpredictability. You never know when you'll be called upon, what will be expected of you, or how harshly you might be punished for even the smallest infraction. More than any physical torment, this ongoing uncertainty breeds a persistent worry that weakens resistance. But maybe the most pernicious tactic is identity destruction. They take away your name and replace it with something more exotic or palatable to Greek ears. They prevent you from using your native tongue or engaging in your family's traditions. They dress you in their clothing. They feed you their food. They make you worship their gods. And, gradually and methodically, they destroy everything that made you who you are. The visitors to the house are the elite of Athens society. Rich merchants, government officials, renowned philosophers, celebrated artists, men whose names are recorded in history as great contributors to human civilization, yet here, in the privacy of Lander's dining room, they shed their public personas and reveal appetites that would shock their admirers. There's Dionysius, a respected politician known for his speeches about justice and civic virtue in public. He champions the rights of citizens and speaks eloquently about the moral foundations of society in private. He delights in humiliating young slaves, forcing them to perform degrading acts while he quotes passages from Homer. Then there's Cleomenes, a wealthy Homer merchant who funds public works and is praised for his generosity to the poor. His charitable reputation masks a taste for violence that leaves slaves scarred and broken. He views his cruelty as a form of education, claiming that pain teaches valuable lessons about the natural order of society, most disturbing of all, is sophist, a philosopher who writes treatises on ethics and the nature of the good life. His public teachings emphasize the importance of virtue, self-control, and respect for the divine order, but when wine loosens his tongue and darkens his heart, he becomes a monster who justifies every cruelty with elaborate philosophical arguments. The moral blindness that permeates Greek society, the same culture that produced magnificent art, groundbreaking philosophy, and innovative political systems, also normalized the complete dehumanization of entire classes of people. The contradiction is not accidental, rather, it is structural. As months turn into years, you develop survival strategies that would have been unthinkable to your younger self. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate a guest's mood and preferences. These men do not see their behavior as contradictory because they believe that slaves exist in a different moral category than free citizens. You learn which actions will result in punishment and which are more likely to receive rewards. You become an expert at psychological absence, seeming obedient while withdrawing so far within yourself that your spirit is impenetrable. But survival has a price. Every time you make a concession to evil, something fundamental within you is eroded, and the notion that you are helpless, useless, and disposable is reinforced. The young man who used to run through olive orchards laughing turns into a hollow man who lives his life like a ghost haunting his own body. The other slaves become your soul family, united by mutual protection and shared trauma. You establish a nonverbal language of looks and gestures to convey cautions and consolation without letting the supervisors know. You also share what little food you have left. Take turns keeping watch during the few hours of sleep you are permitted, and support one another when the nightmares seem too much for you to handle alone. However, even these connections are damaged by the system that brought them about. Envy for the master's favor has the power to turn friends into adversaries. The prospect of improved treatment could persuade someone to report a small infraction committed by another slave, or to expose a planned escape. The very ties that keep you sane turn into instruments of subjugation. On some nights, when you're lying in the dark on your straw mattress, you try to remember your mother's face, but it gets fuzzier every month as the faces of your tormentors take its place. You also try to remember your father's voice, but the sound of the guests' laughter and the cries of other slaves drown it out. Your present nightmare stretches indefinitely into an unthinkable future, while your past fades into the distance, like a half-remembered dream. The physical mistreatment is ongoing and diverse. Others are more direct, using fists, whips, and heated metal to inscribe their ownership on slave bodies. Still others enjoy intricate tortures that combine physical pain and sexual humiliation in ways that are incomprehensible. However, the most devastating aspect of the cruelty is the casual nature of the cruelty. Some guests prefer their entertainment to be subtle psychological dominance that leaves no visible marks but leaves deep wounds in the spirit. For no other reason than boredom, a visitor may stop a philosophical conversation to hit a slave. His poetry reading could be interrupted by someone else who demands more and more. Heinous crimes from the evening's entertainment, the violence, is as commonplace as pouring wine or lighting lamps. It is neither intense nor intimate. It's a survival mechanism, but it comes at a cost. As your second year in the house begins, you notice changes in yourself that go beyond the obvious physical scars. Slaves learn to treat their own bodies as foreign objects that happen to house their consciousness but don't really belong to them. You build the ability to float above yourself during the worst moments, to observe your own suffering with a kind of detached curiosity. Your posture has also changed. You now move with the hunched shoulders and downcast eyes of someone who has learnt that visibility causes suffering. What's more unsettling are the shifts in your thinking. Your voice sounds different, flatter, and more cautious, stripped of the regional accent that once identified you as a child of the mountains. Even when they have no control over you, you catch yourself automatically estimating the tastes and emotions of free people. You cringe at sudden noises and movements. You find yourself thankful for small favors like an extra piece of bread or a night without calling upon a master who is merely uncaring rather than deliberately cruel. This psychological conditioning may be the system's most successful aspect, because their victims have learnt to police themselves. The masters no longer need to constantly watch and threaten them. However, even in this environment of systematic dehumanization, small acts of resistance persist, and slaves develop subtle ways to maintain their dignity and humanity. They share stories about their homelands, preserve memories that their masters attempt to erase, and create art out of scraps. This results in slaves who not only obey out of fear, but also internalize their helplessness to the point where resistance becomes literally unthinkable. Little sculptures concealed within walls during rare periods of privacy, they bore witness to hushed discussions in which they related their stories and affirmed each other's suffering. They also hum songs too softly for overseers to hear and poems written in languages their captors don't comprehend. By insisting on their own humanity and the reality of their suffering, they bear witness to crimes that their society refuses to acknowledge, documenting cruelties and preserving evidence of these crimes. They also remember the names of those who have died, ensuring that these forgotten victims are not entirely erased from history. The slaves maintain the hope that one day someone will hear their stories and realize their reality by resisting the master narrative that presents them as happy property or complicit in their own exploitation. But this resistance takes a great deal of bravery and carries fatal consequences. Slaves who are detected speaking their native tongues may have their tongues removed. Those who are caught feeding or consoling other slaves may be split up or sold to cruel owners. The same deeds that uphold humanity can invite retribution intended to eradicate it. In this tale, the home itself takes on a character. In the third year, something breaks inside of you that you didn't even know could break. It happens during a particularly elaborate poem, one celebrating a military victory against a neighboring city-state. The guests are more numerous than usual. Their celebration is more intense. Their demands are more creative in their cruelty, and the beautiful mosaics and painted frescoes provide a grotesque contrast to the human misery. The marble halls echo with the ghosts of countless victims, and the decorated walls conceal chambers where unspeakable acts occur every night. You are introduced to a group of young aristocrats who are only slightly older than you, but have already consumed alcohol and inherited power. They have created what they believe to be a humorous game, a competition to see who can make their human toys react in the most entertaining ways. They take turns giving orders, each one more humiliating than the last, and keep score like kids playing knucklebones while you perform their degrading show. A significant change in your perspective. You stop considering yourself as someone who must put up with awful things and start considering yourself as exactly what others perceive you, Tobe, an object that exists for their entertainment. The final thread that ties you to the boy who used to herd goats in mountain pastures finally breaks. This psychological death is almost a relief, because there is no longer any hope or dignity to defend you. There is no more suffering in surrendering. You become the ideal slave, anticipating needs before they are expressed, accepting any treatment without protest, and existing in a state of total compliance that necessitates no thought or emotion. The overseers notice the change and reward it by giving you better clothes and more regular meals and a window in the cell. Even in this state of psychological numbness, you perceive the rhythms of the household with the disinterested attention of someone watching a play. You see patterns in the guests' behavior, cycles of violence and indulgence that follow predictable patterns. And other slaves look at you with a mixture of envy and horror, realizing what you've become and the price you've paid for these small comforts. You start to comprehend the economics of misery that sustain the system. The house runs on a steady stream of new victims. Young slaves seldom survive more than a few years before they are either too old or too broken to be of any value to their master. This turnover necessitates frequent trips to the slave markets. Occasionally, you accompany Demetrius on these excursions to demonstrate what proper training can achieve. Some people die from illness or injury, while others are sold to gladiator schools or mining operations when their beauty fades, and a few just vanish one night, their fate unrecorded and unlamented. You recognize the irony. Once, standing shakily on the auction block, the shattered kid now assists in assessing new items for his master's collection. When Demetrius asks for your opinion on a certain youngster's appropriateness, you provide technical assessments based on years of bitter experience, but you don't feel anything because you see the fear on young faces. This boy will resist too much and need to be broken, and the harm is already too great to make the investment worthwhile. The third exhibits potential for sustained service. During a market visit, you meet a boy who remarkably resembles your younger self, the same dark hair, the same terrified eyes. The new slaves look at you with desperate hope, seeing in you some possibility of endurance and survival. They don't realize that survival and living are very different things, and they can't see that the person standing before them died years ago, leaving only a hollow shell programmed to serve. Same desperate search for kindness in a world suddenly turned hostile. He's maybe 13, small for his age, but with the lean strength of someone raised on hard work and simple food. Something stirs in the deadness behind your ribs. As you watch him for just a moment, you remember what it felt like to be human. The sensation is so unexpected and painful that you actually stagger, causing Demetrius to grab your arm and ask, "If you're ill, you lie and say the heat is affecting you, but the truth is more complicated." Seeing that boy has awakened something you thought permanently extinguished. Not hope exactly, but a recognition that the person you once were deserves to be mourned, that the life stolen from you had value. Even if no one else acknowledged it, the boy is purchased by a different household, sparing you the torture of watching his transformation, but his image haunts you for weeks afterward, bringing dreams you haven't experienced in years. You find yourself remembering your mother's cooking, your father's laugh, the feeling of wind on your face as you ran through mountain meadows. The careful numbness that keeps you functioning is threatened by these memories, but they also serve as a reminder that beneath the ideal slave, pieces of your former self still exist. The question is whether those pieces are worth keeping, or if total surrender would be a mercy. The response is given at a different symposium, this one more subdued than the others. The visitors are elderly males. Politicians and philosophers debated the ideal state and the nature of justice in depth. You serve wine and listen to their arguments about the trained invisibility of household property. One of the guests argues that some people are born with inferior souls that make them incapable of self-governance, and they are discussing the writings of a famous philosopher who is debating whether virtue is innate or teachable. Another argues that character is shaped by the environment, and that in some situations even slaves can exhibit virtue. The irony is that these men who torture the defenseless and rape children are discussing the nature of virtue while you, their victim, stand silently holding your wine. They talk about justice while carrying out the worst injustices, and theorize about the ideal state while making hell on earth for those who are under their control. But as you listen to their debate, you realize something crucial. Their philosophical sophistication doesn't justify their cruelty. On the contrary, it makes it worse. They have the mental capacity to recognize the wrongness of their actions, but they still choose evil. They are not naive barbarians acting out of instinct. Rather, they are educated monsters who have rationalized their monstrosities. This insight gives you a peculiar sense of clarity, because you realize that the system is the consequence of conscious decisions made by people who know better but chose worse, not stupidity or archaic thinking. The exquisite artwork, the philosophical debates, the inventions in politics, these are merely many forms of human expression that coexist peacefully with unrestricted brutality. None of them reflect moral advancement. Years pass in this state of clear-eyed despair. You perfect the art of invisibly service, moving through the household like a ghost that occasionally assumes solid form when needed. You watch younger slaves arrive and break, observe the cycles of violence and exploitation that never change, and witness the endless parade of respected citizens who shed their public masks in private some nights. You stand at your small window and look up at the same stars you once watched from your family's roof. You wonder if your parents are still alive, whether they ever think of the son they sold to survive. You imagine your siblings grown up, perhaps, with children of their own, telling stories about the brother who went away when they were young. But these thoughts no longer bring pain. They're more like distant music, beautiful but unrelated to your current existence. You've learned to appreciate them without longing for what they represent. It's a form of meditation. This ability to hold memories without attachment ends when it comes. It arrives without warning or drama. You're perhaps 25 now, though exact age has lost meaning in this place where time is measured in suffering rather than seasons. Your body displays the cumulative harm from years of mistreatment, joints that hurt from previous traumas, and scars that never fully healed, a persistent cough that indicates a chest issue, and more importantly, a decline in your usefulness. The clients who once struggled to get your services now hardly acknowledge you. You're becoming what every slave eventually becomes, unnoticed in a different way. Overlooked rather than coveted, as new slaves have arrived with new beauty and unbroken spirits, making your practiced acquiescence seem normal rather than exceptional. One morning, Demetrius summons you to his rooms and informs you that you are being sold to a mountain mining company. It is portrayed as merely an economic choice, neither a punishment nor a reward. Your value as household entertainment has depreciated below the cost of maintenance, but you still have years of hard labor ahead of you. The mining camps are where slaves go to die slowly. Everyone knows this, including you. The work is backbreaking, the conditions lethal, and the life expectancy measured in months rather than years. It's not execution exactly, but it's not survival either. You receive this news with the same emotional flatness that has characterized your existence for years. Death in the mines, or death in thy household. What difference does it make? You've been dead in every meaningful sense for so long that the cessation of biological function seems almost redundant. But as you prepare for sport, something unexpected happens. Marcus, the boy who arrived around the same time Asua, approaches during your last night in the familiar cell. He's somehow managed to survive and even thrive in his own way, earning a position as personal servant to Lysander's wife. The work is sincere, the abuse less frequent, and the food more regular. He presses a small piece of sharpened metal into your hand. It's a crude but effective tool that could open veins or locks. He doesn't say anything, but it's obvious that you have choices about how your story ends. That night, you ponder your options while holding the metal shard. You could attempt to flee, but the odds are slim, and the penalties for failing would be severe. You could use it as a weapon against your prisoners to exact revenge before your unavoidable death. Or you could turn it against yourself and decide how and when to leave this world. Each option has advantages. Even though the reality would probably be a brief recapture and tortured death, escape offers the fantasy of freedom. Violence would satisfy you and allow you to inflict some of the pain you've endured. Suicide would give you control and allow you to choose dignity over degradation in your final moments. But as dawn draws near, you make a different decision and hide the weapon where other slaves might find it. This is a continuation of the gift of options Marcus gave you. While your story may be coming to an end, others are still being written, and perhaps one of them will lead to a different ending. The trip to the mines passes through scenery that evokes long-forgotten memories, including mountain trails that bring back childhood excursions, villages that may be your own, with households that might include your surviving relatives, and streams where you used to catch fish with your bare hands. Instead, you use the journey to bid farewell to the world you're leaving. You watch eagles soar overhead and remember the time you dreamed of flying, when you smelt wildflowers and thought of your mother's garden. You listen to wind through pine trees and hear your father's voice echoing The mining camp is everything you could have imagined, and worse. Hundreds of slaves laboring in conditions that make household service seem luxurious. The tunnel's narrowness and instability make them vulnerable to sudden collapse, and the dusty air irritates lungs and impairs vision. Even in this last circle of hell, you find something amazing. The slaves have established their own society, their own forms of resistance and mutual aid. They share food when they can, take turns helping those who are too weak to work, and maintain intricate networks of communication that span the entire operation. Most importantly, they remember in whispered conversations during brief rest periods. The quotas are impossible and are intended to extract the maximum amount of labor before inevitable death. They utter the names of loved ones, recount their lives before being taken into captivity, maintain languages that their captors have attempted to eradicate, and bear testimony to one another's humanity in ways that their masters never could. Your personal narrative is incorporated into this oral history. The young man who chose to spread hope even when he was unable to feel it himself. The boy from the mountain village who lived for years in an Athens household. The child who was sold to pay off his family's debts. And the child who suffered unspeakable abuse while holding on to pieces of his identity. The end comes not with drama or violence, but with simple exhaustion. It's not really the end, though, because stories like yours have no real endings. They reverberate through generations, whispered in the shadows, where power doesn't want to look, reminding us that behind every great civilization's accomplishments lie countless unnamed victims whose suffering made those accomplishments possible. Your damaged lungs finally give out to the constant assault of stone dust, and your weakened body gives out after one tunnel collapsed too many times. You die quietly in the darkness, surrounded by fellow slaves who swear to remember your name and carry on your story. These were not contradictions. Rather, they were complementary aspects of the same system. And if we are honest, we must admit that similar systems exist today, albeit they are better sanitized by layers of legal complexity and economic abstraction. The classical world, which we admire for its art, philosophy, and political innovations, was founded on a foundation of human misery so vast and systematic that it defies comprehension. The same culture that gave us democracy, theater, and rational thought also normalized the complete dehumanization of entire populations. We live in a world where children are trafficked for exploitation, while society debates philosophical issues about consent and agency. Powerful people continue to exploit the weak and helpless, and societies continue to build their comfort on the suffering of others. The vulnerable continue to vanish into systems that are meant to consume them while maintaining plausible deniability for everyone else. Where the same moral blindness that permitted Greek intellectuals to torture slaves while writing about virtue permits modern citizens to enjoy products made by child labor while advocating for human rights, where pharmaceutical companies fuel addiction epidemics. While funding research into the nature of mental health, human cruelty tends to evolve towards refinement rather than elimination. The systems become more complex, the justifications more sophisticated, the victims more removed from those who profit from their suffering, but the fundamental transaction stays the same. This is the same compartmentalization that allowed reputable philosophers to justify cruelty and allows modern leaders to overlook systematic abuse while speaking eloquently about justice and progress. The suffering of some people is transformed into the enjoyment or financial gain of others. The industries that sexualize children and social media platforms that encourage teen self-harm under economic systems that view people as expendable resources are contemporary parallels to the Greek symposiums where slaves were tortured for amusement. The desire to sacrifice the weak for the ease of the strong doesn't alter, even when faces and technologies change. The way that these contemporary systems conceal themselves beneath the same types of intellectual sophistication that defined ancient Greece may be the most unsettling parallel. Simple moral concerns are obscured by intricate legal structures. Technological innovation serves as a justification for eschewing fundamental human decency, while economic theories offer scholarly cover for exploitation. We ignore unpleasant realities in order to produce beautiful art. We create innovative technologies, compose poignant poetry, and watch as youngsters are absorbed into abusive systems, and vulnerable youth are driven to self-destruction by algorithms created to maximize involvement. While we engage in deep philosophical debates about ethics, the most fundamental moral principles are often transgressed in our names. His name is lost, his suffering goes undocumented in official histories, and his voice is silenced by those who found it inconvenient. But the boy whose story we followed through these pages died forgotten in a mountain mine. His experience reverberates throughout history in the voices of everyone who has ever been treated as less than human for the benefit of another. Tonight, another young kid is being harmed by systems that take advantage of their fragility, and another child is being sold to pay off a family's debts somewhere in the world. Another victim is learning that the society they believed was founded on moral values is actually based on covert cruelty. Their voices are still calling out for someone to hear them testify, remember their identities, and respect their humanity, and their stories are still being published. The question is not whether such things occur. Rather, they occur everywhere, and are concealed from view by our collective willingness to ignore them. Rather, it is whether we will carry on the long-standing practice of moral blindness, which enables us to profit from systematic cruelty while preserving our sense of moral superiority. Whether we will continue to tell ourselves cozy lies about human progress while real people suffer in the shadow of our enlightenment, or whether we will finally admit that the price of our civilization has always been paid by those who had no say in the transaction. The boy in the mountain mine died for the same reason that children die today, because societies have always found ways to justify the unimaginable when it suits their interests. The marble halls still reverberate with his cries. The exquisite mosaics still hide the stains of innocent blood. And somewhere in our own shining cities, in our own sophisticated institutions, the same ancient horrors still exist, but they have new faces and speak in modern languages. But the fundamental evil remains the same. We are them, they are us. The only difference is that time has never been a barrier to human cruelty, only a reason to forget it. Thank you for joining Secret Historian on this extraordinary journey into the warnings left behind by those who vanished. If you believe the past still holds wisdom, if you know deep down that history was never a sleep-only waiting, subscribe now to Secret Historian.